Now, there are several theories. Now, this is a Sharon McCrum book waiting to happen right here. Here's the theories. One, they had been renovating the building and they moved one of the support beams and weren't paying attention and the building collapsed. Now, this could have happened, if this had happened 12 hours earlier, the July 4th parade in Mount Airy would have been right underneath this building, and who knows who would have got hurt, but it happened in the middle of the night. The other thing is there was this big, large air conditioning unit and a cell tower up on this roof, and maybe the roof gave way because of that. My favorite one, though, is right down the street in this building is a restaurant called The Loaded Goat. And if you ever watched the Andy Griffith Show, you know that the goat ate dynamite.
Yep.
And they were terrified that the goat was going to blow up and kill people. So one of the theories, this of course is tongue-in-cheek, one of the theories is that Jimmy the goat finally blew up and took the building with him. The one I've been promoting is, of course, that it was the ghost of Dr. Hagee who has come back, and he, just trying to sell a few books. Me trying to sell a few books. It's Dr. Hagee. But one of my buddies got real clever, and he decided, no, it was Godzilla who came to Mount Airy.
Oh, I didn't see that.
And Godzilla destroyed the main oak and poured it. So there's our 5 or 6 theories
Bill's got a gun in his store.
on what happened.
Did anybody get hurt?
Nobody got hurt. Happened in the middle of the night.
Oh, that's good.
Happened in the middle of the night. They came down Main Street Tuesday morning, and the building had fallen down on Amy Snyder at the museum, which is diagonally across the street, took this picture. And I think my buddy Cecil Kirkman, who I'm friends with on Facebook, he invented Godzilla. So anyway, this just happened this week. How appropriate. And here we go, Sharon. Get ready, honey. Here we go. Come on in.
Thank you. Sorry.
My thing about history is, if you can, find the oldest person that you can and go and sit down and talk to them.
Yeah, I got a story.
Find the oldest person and go talk to him, because I promise you, you ain't gonna leave empty-handed. Well, for me, there was a lady in Ararat, Virginia, where I grew up. Her name was Caroline Susan Bondurant Cullen. We called her Carrie Sue. She lived to be 107 years old.
Wow. Wow.
She was born, are you ready now? She was born when Theodore Roosevelt was president.
Wow.
Not Franklin. Theodore Roosevelt was president. Well, Carrie Sue's favorite murder story was the one she called Lynch Hollow. And Lynch Hollow is a place in Ararat. And you can see Danville up there. This is from the New York Times newspaper. September 6, 1897, Patrick County, Virginia. Thank you. And somehow or another, the murder in Lynch Hollow and the Scottish boogeyman, Raw-Headed Bloody Bones, got morphed together into a story that one of my buddies, growing up with, dads, used to tell us growing up. So we're going to talk about the murder for a second, and then we're going to talk about the Raw-Headed Bloody Bones for a second. So it's September 1897. Sadie Cook and her family live in Ararat. The family had accused this fellow named Henry Walls, who was 21 years old, of stealing the saddle from the family. Walls said he was going to burn their house down for doing this, and he apparently went to the house when he thought the family were gone, only to find Sadie alone at the house. Sadie took off running, and apparently he took off after her and grabbed a hoe and hit her in the head with a hoe and gave her a mortal wound. The story in Ararat is, you always hear these things, is that they found her, and in her dying moments, Mrs. Epperson, the local postmistress, was asking her who did this to her. And when she got to Henry Walls, Sadie squeezed her hand and left this earth. Or maybe Sadie just left this earth and it just happened. That's when she squeezed her hand. But Henry Walls was the guy who gets accused of this. Well, they go and find Henry, and the constable at Ararat at that point is a fellow named Tom Childress. And Tom Childress is Robert Childress's brother, the man who moved them out, who built all the rock churches and stuff up on the parkway. Tom is Bob's brother. Well, if you know anything about Ararat, Ararat is about 25 miles from the county seat, which is Stewart. So Tom decides he's going to wait until the morning to take Henry to the courthouse. Well, in the meantime, all the great-grandfathers of the guys I grew up with got drinking a little liquor and decided that maybe they would just take care of this themselves. And they go and they pull Henry Walls out of Robert Childress's brother's house, and they take him down to this hollow behind the Hunter's Chapel Church shown here, and they hang him, thereby becoming Lynch Hollow. Today, if you go to Hunter's Chapel Church, Sadie and Henry Walls are both buried in the cemetery there at the church. I used to mow the grass in this cemetery when I was a teenager. There's all kinds of interesting people in a cemetery. You know, I have a stepdaughter who says my idea of a hot date is taking her mother to the cemetery. So, and if you know me, you know that's probably true. Well, Carrie Sue, getting back to Carrie Sue is just fascinated by this murder story. Every time you went to see her, she would tell you about these. When she was eating Reese Cups and drinking Pepsi Colas. She lived to be 107, don't knock it. She also could play the banjo pretty good. Yeah. So anyway, if you go to Ararat, this is the old Bowman house. Lynch Hollow is right behind this. You'll see we have a sign there, the Hollow Road in Ararat. Ararat was the hollow, or Ararat, depending on which political party was in power at any given time and who controlled the post office. So if the Democrats had it, it would be the hollow, and if the Republicans had it, it would be Ararat. So the post office would go back and forth. And this is the hollow post office right here in the front yard. So, anyway. For Phil's information, there's a guy buried in this cemetery who was with Turner Ashby and Jeb Stewart on the day they received their mortal wounds. He was in the 5th Virginia Cavalry, and his name was Clement, and he was with both of them on the day they died, basically.
That's amazing.
Yeah. He may have been related to Mark Twain, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah. So, Gray Gwynn was the father of my friend Jim Gwynn. Gray's still alive. He's about 90 years old. Gray used to tell us this story about, and it was mainly kind of a Scottish boogeyman story to get you to come home before dark. Because, you know, we grew up in a different time. We grew up when we worked in tobacco all day. We'd go jump in the river. You know, your mother didn't worry about you. You played basketball in the dark with your buddies. It was a different time. So, the Ararat River was about a mile from Gray's house, and to get back home, his son Jim literally had to walk right by Lynch Hollow. So Gray would tell us this story, and this is true. We were probably about 13 or 14 when I first heard this. And he would tell this story so well that one of my buddies, Charles Gates, God rest his soul, Charles got on his bicycle and flew home. It scared him to death because he was terrified. And this is the way it went. You know, if you're coming home through Lynch Hollow and it's getting dark, you'll start seeing things, hearing things. And Gray would tell it like this. All of a sudden you hear something and it would go shiftity, shiftity, thumpity, thumpity, shiftity, shiftity. And as you walk through Lynch Hollow, it would get louder. And all of a sudden, through a bale of hay would bust raw-headed Bloody Bones himself and would chase you all the way to home. Now, if he caught you, well, we wouldn't see you again. But if you got home, Gray told this, and this is probably something you've probably heard of. People used to paint their porches like a light blue color. They weren't Carolina fans, Sharon. They just painted it light blue because it's supposed to keep the haints from getting in your house. Yeah. So Gray's dad house had the blue ceiling. all the way around the house. So he's, he tells us it. And the story was that, if you didn't get home before dark, old Rawhead would get you. Well, somehow Gray turned the murder in Lynch Hollow and Rawhead into the same person. So this is Henry Walls with a tail like a hoe handle, because he used a hoe to kill Sadie. And these illustrations are done by my friend Adrian Anderson, who is just like a daughter to me. She's a great artist. We've done a bunch of children's books and stuff. Well, last year we decided we were going to do this a Halloween book. She's got a daughter who I can only describe as the second coming of Wednesday Addams. Well, last year they dress up little Autumn, who's 6, as Wednesday Addams. And Mama, Adrian, goes as Morticia. And Jennifer, who started this sordid tale, for those of you who were here at the beginning, Jennifer went as Cousin It. And if any of you want to see pictures, just get on Facebook and I'll send you a picture of this. But Little Autumn is the spitting image of Wednesday Addams. Adrian is a redhead turned into Morticia with a wig, and Jennifer is Cousin It. And Jennifer, of course, is the one who came up with Murder in a Rearview Mirror. So those are my stories, and I'm sticking to it. And I thank you all for coming. And if anybody wants to talk about anything else, we can. But there's 3 murder stories from my book.
Do you have any updates on the Jeb Stewart home place or anything like that?
Well, you mean the statue, I assume you're talking about. The statue of Jeb Stewart is at the Richmond Wastewater Treatment Plant, as far as I know. They gave it to the Valentine Museum and the Black History Museum. I have a feeling they're going to melt it down and turn it into, quote, new art, whatever that means. And that's pretty much all I know. The birthplace and Jeb Stewart V, who's an orthopedic surgeon, tried to get the city of Richmond to give the birthplace the statue. And yeah, he might have. He's retired. Jeb V operated on her copper tunnel. There you go. Small world. He's a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army, and he's an orthopedic surgeon, like I said. And he tried. He got his lawyer the birthplace, and they tried it. And I'm sure the city of Richmond never had any intention of doing that, but they gave it to the Black History Museum and / the Valentine, which is another museum in Richmond. And that's the last any of us have seen or heard of the statue. But they wanted to bring him home, I guess, and put him up on the birthplace, which is 5 miles from beautiful downtown Mount Airy, which you can go and see where Dr. Hagee's ghost blew up a building last week. But that's all I know about that. Yes, sir.
I know we came late. I must have missed the 2 stories, but that picture, that tail guy there in that picture, and we just watched a thing about an abolition wives' tales.
Oh yeah, this is a very old, famous.
And the blue porch was a thing.
Yeah.
Things that came up. But Skinwalker. Do you know about the Skinwalker?
Yeah, he kind of looks like that. There's a whole,
It's in Utah.
yes, in Utah. But this guy is just we took what Gray had told us as kids and turned him into this, and Adrian drew him. It's really Adrian's creation. But she made sure she made him have a tail like a hoe handle, because that's what he used to kill. And this is something Gray told us as kids. And of course, this was to make us come home from dark. But I was amazed that he somehow had turned a Scottish boogeyman story and a murder story that happened literally across the road from where he lived into the same story, and used it to scare us to death. And if you ever heard him tell this, he'll scare you to death. He's 90 years old, and he still can. I recorded him a couple of years ago doing it, and the story of his family is that he has made every grandchild, once they get a certain age, have nightmares, because he tells them the story when they're just at the right age
To believe it.
I would like to suggest that is how many of our allegorical stories are stretched from one to the next.
Oh yeah, it's the oral tradition. I mean,
Harry Potter and that Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Narnia and all that.
Yeah.
It's all biblical.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's how, the oral tradition is how a lot of these stories get done, and has allowed Sharon to become a New York Times best-selling author because she picks up on them, and has a lot of that stuff in her books, I know, because I've read them all. But I'm still mad Elizabeth McPherson's not around anymore. I was wanting this good-looking historian and her to kind of run off together, but I was told that was never going to happen. I was told that was never going to happen. Anybody else?
You mentioned a new book you're working on?
I'm working on a book about all the controversies surrounding Jeb Stewart.
Okay.
The Mark Clark, our judge, who is also a New York Times best-selling author. He writes kind of murder books. Martin took a portrait of Jeb Stewart down from his courtroom about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, and all heck broke loose in Patrick County. They put it back up in the county administration building. The high school in Fairfax changed the name of it from Jeb Stewart to Justice High School. And then the statue of Monument Avenue that did that. So I went back and researched the history of all this, because I wanted to see if what I was seeing on the news was what was really happening. Of course, it was not.
Right.
It's never that easy. It's never that easy. For instance, the high school in Fairfax, where it was named for Jeb Stewart, that's where he camped in the winter of 1861, literally where the high school is. And I think that's the reason they named it after him. If you don't know, Jeb Stewart grew up in Ararat, Virginia, where I grew up, right down the road, and we've saved about 75 acres of the site of his birthplace, and it's a park now. And you can go out there, and there's interpretive signs. They do a Civil War encampment in October every year. Well, they do other things, but most of the time you just go out there and walk around and learn about the history of the property, which goes all the way back to the American Revolution, where his great-grandfather got killed, which is another chapter in my book. He gets killed by the Tories. The history of the birthplace is Revolutionary War, antebellum plantation. There's a slave cemetery, there's a Stewart cemetery, so there's all these things are covered in the interpretation out there. Like I said, it's 5 miles from the Mount Airy, so you can do a squad car tour and pretend you're Barney Fife, and then you can go to the Civil War. Yes, sir.
Did you say he was killed by the Tories?
Jeb Stewart's great-grandfather was killed by the Tories during the American Revolution.
So that's Airy.
They came to his house and shot him right in front of his wife.
Oh, wow.
1780, it wasn't even Patrick County yet, it was still Henry County when that happened. And he got killed at about the age of 30, and Jeb Stewart would be killed at the age of 31. So there's some parallels in their lives together. But I tried to get Adrian to come with me. She couldn't make it today, or I would have raw-headed bloody bones for you to sell. I know you all want one now, but she's got a 6-year-old, and she couldn't make it. But Sharon, when I tell them all you were here, there's going to be some mad people on my Facebook page. Let me tell you. I think I've never seen so many people use me to get to know Sharon McCrum. It's amazing. What a problem to have.
I want to mention too, it seems like when the Romans they occupied Britain for all those centuries, right? And it seems like I read that they recorded that the Celts, Scots, and so would paint themselves blue for battle. I wonder if that's tied to the hate thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. No, I do know it worked for Mel Gibson. Freedom.
Braveheart.
Yeah. Greatest movie poster I ever saw. Every man dies, not every man really lives. Greatest movie poster I ever saw. Mel Gibson with blue stripes on his face.
Yeah.
But it is true that the Romans recorded that these Celts would paint themselves blue.
Well, in the book, the thing that saves the little boy in my book, Rawhead doesn't get him. I've ruined it now. Rawhead didn't get him because his daddy had painted the ceiling blue, and Rawhead wouldn't cross the barrier, and that saved his life. I got even with Gray. I turned him into the little boy. So Gray's the little boy in my book who's running from Rawhead. So I put him in there. Now, he thought it was great. All his children want equal time now. That's my problem. All these guys I grew up with. You know, all these guys I grew up, and girls I grew up with. So anyway, Anybody else?
What was the first book you ever wrote?
The first book I ever did was a